The jewel of the Inland Empire came into existence in the spring of 1882. Mr. E.J. Waite of Wisconsin planted the first orange grove in the city. For almost 75 years, the city was the center of the largest navel orange producing region in the world. Today, Redlands, California continues to embrace its rich heritage and has kept its most hidden treasure shining bright for years, the Kimberly Crest House and Gardens. To discover its secret, we must travel down the path of this 1897 French chateau-style home. This three-story chateau is over 7,000 square feet and was originally built for Miss Cornelia A. Hill.
So you could even see the house from Highland Avenue because the trees weren't here. It was just a house, imagine, going by in a horse and buggy and this huge mansion looming up, Mrs. Hill's home on a hill.
Until the Kimberleys arrived.
So the Kimberleys knew about Redlands, like all the wealthy families in the cold weather climates knew, and they were coming here for vacations from time to time. And they heard that Mrs. Hill was going to sell her home. When Mrs. Hill had the home built, these gardens were not here. Mrs. Kimberly hired her son-in-law, Edwin Bergstrom, who was a very well-known architect. This is his very first and last architect design for Italianate garden, and then who became the next owners. Now we say, well, the next owners were the Kimberly family, and that is the last family to own the home. There were really only two families to own this home, which is amazing, from 1896, and only the first one owned it for 10 years.
Kimberly-Clark and Company was founded in 1872 by John A. Kimberly and Associates. The group's first business was operating paper mills, which the collective expanded throughout the following decades. Kleenex, a disposable handkerchief, followed in 1924, and 2 years later, the company went public as Kimberly-Clark.
But Mr. Kimberly was still going to the factory. He would commute, of course, to his factory, and Mrs. Kimberly would be here all by herself during the week and ran the whole household, and became very involved in Redlands as a community, and was very much involved in civic organizations, starting them herself, etc. And she started a group called the Kimberly Juniors. And the Kimberly Juniors was designed for young women, like young girls, because she thought that the young girls of 19, 15, and 16 were not ambitious enough and needed more training. And so the Kimberly Juniors actually still are around today. We also have a name for this house besides calling it the Kimberly-Clark Mansion. We also call it the Home of Three Women. And that's because we look at that this home was really kept together by three women. And the first one, of course, was the builder, who was Mrs. Cornelia Hill. And the second would be Mrs. Kimberly, who bought the home in 1906. And then the third is her daughter, the last living Kimberly to be here, anyway. They're still alive, but in this house. And she's a third woman of the house, because she kept her mother's traditions to go on.
Yeah. They were very, very philanthropic, so they gave money to a number of causes throughout town, so they were very helpful in that way. And they were very active civically. So they really set an example of what people in Redlands ought to be doing, you know. We have the mansion in the grounds, which is the Kimberly-Clark Association. It's a private nonprofit corporation, and its intent is to serve as a museum to educate the public. So I think that is very much in the same vein, and Mrs. Shirk was very conscious of that when she set up the Kimberly-Clark Association.
Prior to the conversion to museum, the mansion served as one of the filming locations for the 1981 movie Hell Night, starring Linda Blair. In the film, underground tunnels were depicted, but the house and estate had no such feature. The Kimberly-Clark Association has maintained the property since 1981 and continues the legacy of Mrs. Shirk's involvement in civic events.
It's definitely, as the Inland Empire as a region has matured, I think Redlands really does stand out as a very special community. I think those are the things that have helped to make Redlands a jewel of the Inland Empire. And then within that you have certain things that are related to the built environment. like the mansion, which is absolutely unique in Southern California. There was only one other building that was like it, and it's not even recognizable. And the activities that go around as part of it are one of the things that makes Redlands special. Certainly the library and full houses, but if they're not somehow connected to the community, it doesn't really matter if you have them except to know that they're there. The identity in Redlands is wrapped up in its history.